Story 1. The Peeping Tom. It was a chilly October evening, and I was relishing the solitude of my cozy apartment. My roommates had left for the night, heading out to a party I had opted to skip. I enjoyed the rare opportunity for peace and quiet, often savored in my tiny sanctuary. The soft hum of the city outside was the only sound breaking the silence. I was curled up on the couch in my living room, wrapped in a thick blanket with a good book in hand. The room was bathed in the warm, golden glow of the reading lamp I had recently bought. Created a cocoon of comfort amidst the growing chill of the autumn night. The air outside was crisp, and the trees rustled gently as a slight breeze passed through. As I flipped through the pages engrossed in the world of fiction, I began to hear an odd noise. First, it was a faint, rhythmic tapping, almost like a distant drumbeat. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was the house settling, or perhaps the sound of rain hitting the window pane. I shifted in my seat, attempting to focus on the book, but the tapping persisted and grew louder, becoming more pronounced. The noise was coming from the direction of my bedroom window, which was on the side of the apartment facing the street. I felt a twinge of unease, but I brushed it off as my imagination running wild. I didn't want to let a small noise disrupt my peaceful evening. Finally, the tapping grew so persistent that I couldn't concentrate on my reading any longer. I set my book aside and walked toward the bedroom, trying to stay calm. My footsteps seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness of the apartment. As I approached the window, the noise abruptly stopped, which only heightened my anxiety. I cautiously pulled back the curtain and peered outside. My initial relief at seeing only the darkened street was short-lived. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows, and the wind swayed the branches of the trees, creating flickering patterns on the ground. Just as I was about to turn away, I saw it, a face pressed against the glass, staring directly into my room. My heart leaped into my throat as I realized that someone was watching me. The face was partially obscured by the darkness, but I could clearly see the eyes, wide, unblinking, and filled with a cold intensity. It was a man, and his expression was almost unnervingly calm. My breath caught in my throat as panic set in. I stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp in my haste. I rushed to the living room, grabbing my phone with trembling hands. My fingers fumbled as I dialed 911. When the operator answered, my voice was barely a whisper. I stammered out a report of a peeping Tom outside my window, trying to convey the urgency of the situation. The operator assured me that police were on their way and advised me to stay calm and lock all doors and windows. I hurried through the apartment, locking every door and window with a sense of growing dread. Each lock clicked shut, with a finality that did little to quell my fear. I glanced frequently at the bedroom window, where the man's face had been. The thought of him still being out there, possibly lurking in the shadows, was deeply unsettling. As I secured the apartment, I noticed that the tapping had stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I tried to steady my breathing, but the adrenaline coursing through my veins made it difficult. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, and every creak of the apartment seemed amplified in the oppressive quiet. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as I waited for the police to arrive. The anticipation was unbearable, and my imagination began to run wild with scenarios of what could happen next. I tried to distract myself by checking the locks once more and moving away from the windows, but the feeling of being watched lingered. When the police finally arrived, their presence was a welcome relief. They conducted a thorough search of the area around my apartment, but found no sign of the intruder. They took a detailed report and suggested that I consider installing security cameras or motion sensor lights to enhance my home security. The officers were kind and professional, but their reassurances did little to ease the lingering fear. As I watched them leave, I couldn't shake the image of that man's face. His eyes, so cold and unfeeling, seemed to haunt me even in the safety of my secured apartment. The thought that someone had been watching me from outside, possibly for an extended period, left me feeling exposed and vulnerable. That night, sleep eluded me. Every shadow seemed threatening, and every sound outside was magnified in my heightened state of fear. Kept the lights on and stayed close to my phone, unable to relax. The experience had shattered my sense of safety, leaving me with a lingering sense of violation. In the days that followed, I took every precaution suggested by the police. I installed security cameras and motion sensor lights, and I became hyper-aware of my surroundings. Despite these measures, the sense of security was hard to restore. The knowledge that someone had intruded into my private space and watched me from outside made me acutely aware of my vulnerability. The incident was a stark reminder of how unsettling it can be to feel so exposed in what is supposed to be a safe haven. Even though the man never returned, the psychological impact of the encounter left me wary and on edge. The image of his face remained etched in my memory, a chilling reminder of that terrifying night. Story 2: The Stalker in the Walls. Moving into a charming old apartment building seemed like a perfect opportunity for a fresh start. The place had character, creaky floors, intricate moldings, and an atmosphere that whispered stories of the past. Settling in, I relished the quiet and the solitude that came with having the space to myself. The initial weeks were filled with the excitement of unpacking and decorating. Everything felt just right until subtle disturbances began to disrupt my newfound peace. At first, it was minor, unusual creaks and groans that I attributed to the building's age. But gradually, the noises became more distinct and unnerving. Late one evening, as I was preparing for bed, I heard a persistent scratching sound coming from within the walls. The noise was faint at first, like a distant rustling, but it grew louder and more rhythmic. My initial reaction was to dismiss it as the building's settling, or perhaps a loose pipe. However, as the scratching continued, it became impossible to ignore. Unable to sleep, I decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and approached the wall from where the sound seemed to originate. With each step, the noise seemed to respond, almost as if it were aware of my presence. I gently tapped the wall, and the scratching stopped abruptly. The silence was unsettling, so I tapped again, and the scratching resumed with a peculiar persistence. Determined to uncover the source, I called a handyman the next day. I described the noises and he agreed to take a look. He examined the wall, tapping and probing, but found nothing alarming. He assured me that the building was likely just settling and left without any further explanation. I was left with a growing sense of unease, feeling as though I had missed something important. That night, the scratching returned, more insistent than before. My attempts to ignore it were futile. The noise seemed to move around the apartment, creating an eerie sense of being followed. Desperation led me to borrow a small camera with a flexible lens from a friend. With the camera, I tried to peer into the walls through tiny openings. What I discovered was horrifying. The camera revealed hidden compartments within the walls, filled with old blankets, discarded food wrappers, and personal items. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Someone had been living in the walls. My stomach churned at the thought that a stranger had been occupying these hidden spaces, observing my every move without my knowledge. I dialed 911, my hands trembling as I explained the situation. Police arrived promptly, and I led them to the walls where I had seen the disturbing evidence. They conducted a thorough search, finding the hidden compartments and confirming my fears. The intruder had been using the space as a makeshift hideout, and there were signs that they had been monitoring me. The search didn't uncover any immediate signs of the intruder's presence. The officers suggested that the person might have fled upon realizing that I was aware of their presence. They advised me to enhance the security of my apartment and remain vigilant. In the aftermath, the sense of violation was overwhelming. Feeling of being watched, combined with the knowledge that someone had been hiding in my home, made it impossible to relax. I invested in security cameras, reinforced the apartment, and took every precaution to safeguard my space. Yet, the psychological impact lingered. Every creak of the building, every shadow seemed menacing. The apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a constant reminder of the invasion. Despite my efforts to secure the space, the trauma of having an intruder living so close, hidden within the very walls of my home, left lasting scars. The discovery of the hidden spaces and the intruder's invasion had forever altered my perception of safety. The charming old building, with all its character, now seemed ominous, a reminder of the unsettling experience that had shattered my sense of security. Story 3: The Home Alone Burglar. My evening had started off like any other. Just me, my cozy apartment, a stack of paperwork that needed sorting. My roommates had gone out for the night, leaving me to enjoy some much-needed alone time. I settled into my favorite armchair, the TV softly playing in the background as I worked through my tasks. The apartment was unusually quiet. The occasional hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of city life were the only interruption. I was immersed in my work when I noticed a faint sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere near the front door. I initially shrugged it off, attributing it to the sounds of the city. Perhaps it was just a neighbor or something else mundane. The tapping continued intermittently. With each passing minute, it grew more persistent. I felt a prickle of unease, but tried to focus on my work. The noise, however, became increasingly hard to ignore. It was as if someone was tapping lightly against the door, and the sound seemed to grow louder and more deliberate. I decided to investigate. I walked cautiously toward the door, tapping ceasing as I approached. I peered through the peephole but saw nothing out of the ordinary, just the dimly lit hallway outside. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I had imagined the noise, but decided to open the door slightly to check. As I did, I saw nothing but an empty hallway. I stepped outside and looked around, but there was no one in sight. I closed the door and locked it, feeling slightly foolish for having been so jumpy. I went back to my chair, trying to push the incident out of my mind. No sooner had I settled back into my work, and I heard a loud crash. My heart leapt into my throat as I realized the noise was coming from the kitchen. I stood up quickly, my mind racing. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking as I tried to stay calm. The operator answered, and I explained that I thought someone might be breaking into my apartment. As I spoke, I heard another crash followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, and coming closer. My blood ran cold as I realized that someone was indeed inside my apartment. Footsteps grew louder, and I could hear them moving through the rooms. My heart pounded as I thought about where to hide. I knew I had to stay quiet and stay out of sight. I crept toward my bedroom, hoping to find a safe spot to wait until the police arrived. As I moved, I heard drawers being pulled open and items being rifled through. The intruder was methodical, taking their time as if they were searching for something specific. I hid in my closet, small space, feeling claustrophobic as I huddled in silence. My phone was in my hand, and I texted the 911 operator to update them on the situation, my fingers trembling as I typed. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, the sounds of the intruder's movements echoing through the apartment. I could hear the faint clinking of metal and the rustling of plastic as they continued their search. My breath came in shallow bursts, and every creak of the floorboards seemed to amplify my fear. Suddenly, I heard the sound of sirens approaching. The intruder's movement stopped, and for a moment, there was complete silence. I held my breath, listening intently. The sound of the sirens grew louder, and I could hear the police officers' voices outside my door. The intruder seemed to be moving quickly, trying to escape before they were caught. There was a commotion outside my apartment as the police arrived and began to search the building. I could hear their footsteps and the sound of them calling out as they searched each apartment. I stayed hidden in the closet, not daring to move or make a sound until I heard the familiar knock on my door. "Police, open up," came the shout. I slowly emerged from the closet, my legs feeling like jelly as I made my way to the door. I unlocked it and opened it to find several police officers standing there, their expressions serious but reassuring. I quickly explained the situation, and they began to search the apartment. The officers discovered that the intruder had managed to break in through a window that was left slightly ajar. They found evidence of the attempted burglary. A drawer had been emptied, and a few items were missing, but the intruder had fled before taking anything substantial. The police assured me that they would do their best to track down the culprit and advised me to take extra precautions in securing my apartment. I was deeply shaken, the realization of how close I had come to a dangerous encounter settling in. In the days that followed, I took every measure to ensure my safety. I had new locks installed, reinforced windows, and added security cameras. The experience had left me feeling vulnerable and unsettled, but the presence of these new measures provided some comfort. Though the police never caught the intruder, I slowly began to regain my sense of security. The apartment that had once felt like a safe haven now seemed a little less inviting, but I learned to adapt and live with the changes. The incident served as a stark reminder of the importance of home security and the unexpected dangers that can arise even in the most familiar of places. The disappearing friend. Friday night was supposed to be a quiet evening at home. My parents were out of town, and I had the house to myself. Around 7 p.m., I decided to invite my friend, Jake, over to hang out. Jake and I had been friends since elementary school, and he always knew how to make a night fun, even if we were just watching TV and eating junk food. Jake arrived around 8 p.m., and we settled into the living room. We decided to watch a few episodes of our favorite show, Stranger Things. The eerie plot and supernatural elements were just what we needed to set the mood for a chill night. We laughed, joked, and debated the show's twists and turns, losing track of time as we often did. Around 11 p.m., Jake stood up and stretched. "I should get going," he said, yawning. "Got an early start tomorrow." "All right, man," I replied, standing up as well. "Thanks for coming over." We walked to the front door, and I opened it for him. As he stepped out onto the porch, he turned back to me with a serious expression on his face. "Don't let them in," said. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Who, the Demogorgon?" I teased, referencing the monster from the show. Jake didn't laugh. His eyes were intense, almost pleading. "Don't let them in," he repeated, then turned and walked away. I stood there for a moment, puzzled. Jake was known for his pranks, but this felt different. Shaking off the weird feeling, I closed the door and locked it. I chalked it up to him trying to spook me after our creepy TV marathon. I went back to the living room, intending to watch another episode before bed. As I settled back onto the couch, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling Jake's words had left me with. The house felt unnaturally quiet. Every creak and groan seemed amplified. Just as I was about to press play, there was a knock at the door. My heart skipped a beat. It was almost midnight. Who could be knocking at this hour? I hesitated, Jake's warning echoing in my mind. I slowly walked to the door and peered through the peephole. My breath caught in my throat. It was Jake, standing there with the same serious expression he had when he left. Something was off. His clothes looked different, almost disheveled, and his eyes, they seemed vacant. "Jake?" I called through the door. "What are you doing back here?" "Let me in," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. Chill ran down my spine. "Why did you come back?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just let me in," he repeated, his tone insistent. Remembering his earlier words, I felt a surge of fear. "Jake, you told me not to let them in. Who were you talking about?" There was a long pause. Then, in a voice that sounded more like a whisper, he said, "Don't let them in." I stepped back from the door, my heart pounding. This wasn't right. Something was very wrong. I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off the door. "Jake, I don't know what's going on, but you need to leave," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. There was no response, just silence. I waited for what felt like an eternity, but the knocking didn't resume. Finally, I gathered the courage to look through the peephole again. Jake was gone. I locked all the doors and windows, double-checking everything. My mind raced with fear and confusion. What had just happened? Who, or what, was that at my door? The rest of the night was a blur of restless pacing and listening for any sound. I barely slept, jumping at every creak and shadow. The next morning, I received a call from Jake's mom. She sounded frantic. "Have you seen Jake? He didn't come home last night, and we can't reach him." My blood ran cold. "He was here last night, but he left around 11. I thought he went home." "No," said, her voice trembling. "We found his car on the side of the road. It looks like he had an accident." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Is he okay?" "He's in the hospital, unconscious. They think he might have been there for hours." I hung up the phone, my mind reeling. If Jake was in the hospital all night, who, or what, had been at my door? That question haunted me for days, and I never got an answer. But one thing was clear. Jake's warning had saved me from something terrifying, and I would never forget the night I almost let them in. Story 5. The Unknown Caller. It was one of those nights where I was drowning in assignments and coffee. Clock on my desk read 11:45 p.m., and I had no intention of stopping until I finished the last chapter of my textbook. My apartment was silent, except for the occasional hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock. As I highlighted another key point in my notes, my phone rang, startling me. I glanced at the screen. An unknown number. Usually, I would ignore calls like that, but something compelled me to answer this one. "Hello," I said, trying to mask the irritation in my voice. There was no response, just heavy breathing. I frowned and hung up, chalking it up to a wrong number. I returned to my studies, but the phone rang again a few minutes later. The same unknown number. "Hello?" I repeated, this time more forcefully. Again, nothing but breathing, followed by a whisper that was barely audible. My curiosity was piqued, but I hung up, feeling a bit unnerved. I decided to put my phone on silent and focus on my work. An hour passed without incident, and I was making good progress. Just as I started feeling confident about finishing, my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. I hesitated, then pressed play. The message was a series of whispers and breaths, but I could make out a few words. "Watching you. Listen closely." A chill ran down my spine. I deleted the message and tried to brush it off as a prank. I wasn't about to let some weirdo disrupt my night, but then the calls started coming more frequently. Each time, I would let it go to voicemail, and each message was creepier than the last. The whispers became more coherent, repeating phrases like, "I see you," and "don't turn around." I decided to call the police. They took my report seriously, promising to trace the number and investigate. Their reassurance calmed me somewhat, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Around 2 a.m., I received another call. Despite my fear, I answered, ready to confront whoever was on the other end. This time, the voice wasn't whispering. It was speaking clearly, and it was my voice. "Why are you ignoring me?" it said, perfectly mimicking my tone and inflection. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "I want you to listen," I replied. "Listen to what you said tonight." I hung up, my heart pounding. I started replaying the night in my head. What had I said that this person could have recorded? Didn't make any sense. Desperate for answers, I turned on every light in the apartment and checked every room. Nothing was out of place. I sat back at my desk, trying to convince myself it was just a prank. The fear gnawed at me. My phone buzzed again, another voicemail. This time, I listened immediately. The message was a recording of my own voice from earlier in the night, saying, "Hello," followed by the whispered phrase, "Don't turn around." I felt a presence behind me. My breath caught in my throat, and I slowly turned around, but there was nothing there. Just my empty living room, bathed in the glow of the desk lamp. The police called back around 3 a.m., saying they had traced the number to an old phone line that had been disconnected for years. They suggested it might be a technical glitch, some crossed wires, but I knew it was more than that. For the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. The calls stopped, but the fear lingered. I finally fell asleep as the first light of dawn broke through the curtains. The next day, I changed my phone number and installed security cameras around my apartment. I tried to move on, but every time I heard an unknown ring, my heart would race. To this day, I don't know who or what was behind those calls, but I'll never forget the terror of hearing my own voice on the other end of the line and the chilling warning to not turn around.